The architecture of endurance, surviving the medieval English winter. The year is 1250. In the heart of rural England, winter is not merely a season, it is a relentless adversary. To the modern mind, winter is a matter of adjusting a thermostat or pulling a heavier coat from the closet. But for the medieval villager, winter was a high-stakes gamble against the elements. Survival depended on a delicate combination of earth, wood, fire, and the warmth of living bodies. This is the story of how humanity carved a bubble of life out of a world of frost, smoke, and mud. 1. Walls of earth and bone, the cruck-frame and daub. The first line of defense against the freezing English daub was the house itself. In 1250, the concept of a home was an intimate extension of the land. These were not structures built of cold, clinical brick, but of the very soil beneath the villager's boots. The skeleton of the medieval cottage was often the cruck-frame. Massive, curved timbers, selected by the woodwright, a forest expert, for their natural shape, were joined together to form a rib cage for the building. To fill these ribs, villagers used wattle and daub. This was a lattice of woven hazel rods, wattle, smeared with a sticky, pungent mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung, daub. While the thought of living inside walls made of dung may wrinkle a modern nose, it was a masterpiece of medieval improvisation. Once dried, the daub became a solid, wind-resistant barrier. In some regions, villagers even mixed cattle blood into the daub to act as a binding agent, creating dark, iron-strong walls that stood firm against the howling gales. These houses were organic in the truest sense. They breathed with the seasons, were repaired with mud every spring, and eventually melted back into the earth from which they came. 2. The Sacred Heart, smoke, fire, and survival. If the walls were the body of the home, the hearth was its soul. In the 13th century, the fireplace as we know it, recessed into a wall with a chimney, was a luxury of the elite. For the commoner, the hearth sat in the center of the room in a shallow pit lined with stones. This central hearth was a living god. It was never allowed to die. If a fire went out, it was seen as a harbinger of death, and a coal had to be borrowed from a neighbor in a moss-covered clay pot. The hearth provided the heat to cook the daily pottage, a thick barley and onion stew, the light to mend tools, and the warmth to keep newborns alive.
However, the hearth brought with it a suffocating companion: smoke. Without a chimney, smoke filled the room, curling under the rafters before escaping through a small hole in the thatch. The air was thick, stinging the eyes and blackening the lungs, a condition now known by historians as the winter cough. Yet the smoke was also a protector. It disinfected the air, killed insects nesting in the straw roof, and dried the timber frame to prevent rot. In the medieval mind, the smoke that choked you was also the smoke that saved your house. Living insulation, the beast corner. One of the most striking aspects of medieval survival was the proximity to livestock. In the depths of winter, the line between barn and bedroom vanished. Peasants shared their one-room huts with their most valuable assets, their pigs, goats, and cows. This was not merely a matter of protecting animals from thieves or wolves. It was a clever form of geothermal heating. A cow or a pig generates a significant amount of body heat. By huddling together in the beast corner, separated only by a low wooden partition, the animals provided a constant living warmth that kept the cottage air tolerable. Children were often lulled to sleep by the rhythmic breathing of a cow, a sound that signaled safety, food, and heat. The smell of hay, manure, and animal breath became the scent of survival. The art of thatching and the waxy light. The roof was perhaps the most precarious part of the home. Thatching was an art of gamble. Reeds or straw were bundled into yelms and pinned to the roof at steep angles to shed rain and snow. A good thatch could last 20 years, but a single spark from the hearth could turn the home into a funeral pyre in minutes. Because glass was a precious treasure reserved for cathedrals and kings, the medieval window was a crude affair. Villagers used horn windows, thin sheets of ox horn scraped until they were translucent. These panes allowed a dim, waxy, golden light to filter into the smoky rooms. It wasn't enough to see clearly, but it was enough to remind the inhabitants that the sun still existed beyond the gray winter mist. The narrative reveals a fascinating paradox. The peasant's hut was often warmer than the nobleman's castle.
The manor and castle were monuments to power, built of cold, damp limestone. While the lord had tapestries to block drafts and massive fireplaces that could burn entire logs, the sheer scale of the stone halls made them impossible to heat. The stone absorbed the cold, turning corridors into icy caves. In contrast, the peasant hut, small, cramped, and insulated with moss and animal heat, held its temperature with surprising efficiency. In 1250, class determined your status, but it did not necessarily determine your comfort against the frost. Even in the abbeys, monks lived a life of austerity meets engineering. They were the first to experiment with warming houses and underfloor flues, but their primary defense remained their thick wool habits and the communal warmth of chanting together in drafty chapels. Sixth, the spark of change, the evolution of the chimney. Toward the end of the 13th century, a technological revolution began to whisper through the towns: the chimney. The introduction of the chimney changed human psychology. By moving the fire to the wall and venting the smoke through a brick shaft, the air became clear. This allowed for the creation of upper floors and private rooms. However, it also signaled the end of the communal hearth. No longer did the entire household, servants, family, and animals, huddle around a single central point. The chimney brought privacy, but it also began the slow fragmentation of the communal spirit that had defined medieval survival for centuries. Seventh, the spirit of the hungry gap. As winter transitioned into the thaw, the danger did not end. This was the hungry gap, the time when winter stores were depleted and the spring harvest was months away. Survival during this time was a test of patience. Villagers cleaned their hearths, scattering the winter's ash onto the fields as a symbolic and literal fertilizer. They opened their doors to release the night, letting the fresh spring wind chase away the stale vapors of a season spent in smoke. Conclusion: the legacy of warmth. The story of the medieval winter is not a tragedy of poverty, but a testament to ingenuity and connection. These people did not survive because they were hardier than us, but because they understood the rhythm of the land. They knew how to twist straw to hold back the wind. They knew the exact color of mud that would dry strongest, and they knew that the heartbeat of a cow was a better heater than a pile of stones. Warmth in 1250 was not a utility, it was a ceremony. It was the smoring of the fire, the layering of wool, the sharing of a pottage pot, and the quiet faith that the sun would eventually return. As we sit in our modern, temperature-controlled homes, we are the descendants of those who huddled around central hearths, breathing mist into the frozen dawn and refusing to let their fires go out. The heart, as the old medieval proverb says, keeps the fire even when the wood is gone.